Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I went on a 30-year sabbatical after our class, and this is my first time back in the academic womb, and I'm happy to be here, especially at this center, which does such important work. And actually, Lisa suggested the topic back last winter, and I spent the intervening time thinking about it, and I hope you'll find the experience fruitful. Let me tell you where I'm coming from and give you an idea where I'm going in this talk. And by the way, I thought we'd talk for about, I will talk for 20 minutes, and then we'll take a break and so that I can save my voice and you can think about what we're talking about and ask questions or discuss anything. My father was a serious composer and teacher. My mother, a homemaker and late blooming novelist and short story writer. I did graduate work in sociology at the University of Toronto. Taught off and on for a couple of decades in sociology and social sciences at a number of universities. Then in the mid-'80s, I met a female engineer in Ottawa. Her name is Paulina. She was an offshore and Arctic engineer, and was also manager for risk analysis at COCLA, which is the Canadian Oil and Gas Lands Administration, the precursor to the National Energy Board. Paulina was a defector from the Soviet Union, landing at Gander Airport in 1971, the only defector from Eastern Europe who arrived at what was known as the hole in the Berlin Wall, or the Iron Curtain, with children in tow and the KGB hot on her heels. In 1987, when the planets were aligned, a Woodstock generation sociologist married a no-nonsense ex-Soviet engineer. When Blaine and I met, her two boys were grown up, fully wired for the 21st century, and composed completely of stem cells, by which, of course, I mean science, technology, engineering, and math. So, having come of age, well, I should say we launched a series of projects in half a dozen countries that were business and technology based, and ranged everywhere from deep ocean technology, deep ocean archaeology, to fiber optic sensing for pipeline security, film, television production, and electronic publishing. So, having come of age as a member of the analog generation, it was Paulina who dragged me kicking and screaming into the digital age. So my talk today is about the tension between what the British scientist and novelist C.P. Snow called two cultures, science and the humanities. Like Joni Mitchell, I've looked at life from both sides now. When the prophet Steve Jobs had received the revelations for the new cyber world on Mount Apple, he descended carrying with him the digital commandments for the future generations, the iPod, the iPhone, and the iPad. These beautiful devices he distributed to the peoples of the world, regardless of nationality, color, and creed. The prophet Jobs spake unto the multitudes that their 40 years in the analog desert had expired, and they were now free to travel the galaxy, even without a college degree, confident that all the world's knowledge and entertainment would fit inside their pocket. The prophet Jobs urged the people to be fruitful and multiply so that every iPhone would have a child. Thus it came to pass that the world's greatest high-tech storyteller created the future he had imagined. If capitalism is the principle of creative destruction, according to the economist Joseph Schumpeter, then rapidly evolving science and information technology in recent decades has become the nuclear version of creative destruction, altering lifestyles, relationships, psychology, politics, work habits, job markets, and the transfer of wealth. When we examine the conventional categories of technology and human history, we discover a remarkable timeline. The Paleolithic period, or Old Stone Age, lasted for hundreds of thousands of years. The Neolithic period, or New Stone Age, lasted for several thousand years. The Industrial Revolution, beginning in the mid-1700s, spanned less than 2 centuries. The world's first electric grid, without which our modern world would not exist, was hooked up in 1882, just over 5 generations ago, to a few hundred lamps in a small neighborhood of New York City. The technological revolution, the age of film, television, the microchip, and the computer, satellites, fiber optics, can be measured in a couple of generations. And the age of the internet, which is turning the world upside down and inside out, is barely 3 decades old. The ubiquitous smartphone, owned by 2 billion people, is less than 10 years old. Time, oh good time, asked the folk song, where did you go? By the way, much of the refugee migration in the last couple of years is being led by the smartphone. That's interesting application of technology to social disorder. Let's begin with the cries of impending doom from the health sciences community. Neuroscientists tell us that the evolutionary biology of the human brain is measured in millennia. They are concerned that pervasive computers and the internet are having a profound effect on our brains and nervous systems that are ill-equipped to manage the results. Susan Greenfield is a neuroscientist, entrepreneur, and British politician. In her polemical book, Mind Change, How Digital Technologies Are Leaving Their Mark on Our Brains, she argues that our technologies are not only addictive, they are an existential threat. The brain, she writes, has an evolutionary mandate to adapt to its environment, and the digital world is changing at too rapid a pace for individuals or government regulations to keep up. Lives can be destroyed, as in the extreme case where a Korean couple's compulsive video gaming led to the starvation of their newborn, or when teenagers commit suicide at the behest of cyber bullies and other predators. But the threats, she says, are serious even among billions of moderate users. A dramatic loss of empathy in recent years and a sharp decline in outdoor physical activity among children. We experience mindlessness when we pursue sensation, impulsiveness, and quick reward. The defining characteristics of children, addicts, and fast-paced sports, sex, dancing, or dreaming. Like that dream you had last night. Greenfield claims that the digital revolution exploits our biological propensity for mindlessness. She cites laboratory studies finding that social networking and video gaming trigger dopamine in much the same way as junk food and the drug ecstasy. Never tried ecstasy myself. She argues that cyberspace is devoid of immediate consequences and gives instant access to information without guidance, with the results that our attention spans shrink, deeper thinking declines, and interpersonal bonds become weak. The most vulnerable are digital natives whose impressionable brains are born into an environment that upsets thousands of years of evolution. Although in defense of gamers, I've heard that video gaming is a terrific preparation for air traffic controlling jobs. I believe these changes in brain chemistry and cognitive processing, which are deep and abiding, hold profound implications for the conduct of schooling and will require a radical reassessment of our 19th century educational paradigms designed to restrain our natural inquisitiveness and to breed fear of mistakes and failure. How easily we forget that searching and experimentation are essential to human existence and comprise the roots of creativity, the absence of which reduces us to robots, which can mimic and magnify many human skills, but lack imagination, out of which the future is discovered and created. The social and psychological issues surrounding the new media were foreshadowed half a century ago by Marshall McLuhan, whose oracular media insights were visionary, but whose writings and aphorisms such as the medium is the message or the massage were often cryptic and poetic. He understood that television in particular was overhauling our cognitive functions and perceptual priorities. In terms of engaging different parts of the brain, the effects of print technology are vastly different from the combination of moving images, color, music, vocal sound, and contemporary electronic media. Not just photography, film, television, and world music, but the internet and the World Wide Web are the consummation of McLuhan's global village. Of course, it is not only the medium that is the message. The content or the message is also the message. And there is much room for debate and controversy here, which I will address shortly. Commenting recently on an online article lamenting the loss of real books in the digital world, a talented 40-something relative of mine wrote to the blogger, quote, "Books are dead trees, the souls of the forest. The new sublime is not reading at all. I just Facebook and Instagram. I have almost 1,000 friends, all at BFFs, best friends forever. I make beautiful selfies, like a writer would make beautiful prose. Just a change of the time, that's all." Unquote. Magic smartphone on a stick. Who has the fairest profile pic? I'm sure if René Descartes were alive today, he would surely declare that selfie ergo sum. So this photogenic relative and I appear to experience a digital divide when it comes to the meaning of friend. I'm 72 and can count my BFFs on the fingers of one hand. And they're all dogs. Loyalty has its rewards. Now about books. If you are a writer and you were worried about writer's block, you can now worry about reader's block. A more upbeat assessment comes from Dana Boyd in her recent book, It's Complicated, The Social Lives of Network Teens. It's a well-researched book which looks at the digital lives of screenagers, where Dana Boyd, by the way, her book is free online. She's a Harvard and NYU academic and a principal researcher at Microsoft. She investigates the ways in which social media affected quality of teens' lives. Having immersed herself in the digital world, she explores popular notions about identity, privacy, safety, danger, and bullying. Ultimately, Boyd argues that society fails young people when paternalism and protectionism hinder teenagers' ability to become informed, thoughtful, and engaged citizens through their online interactions. They also crave access to public spaces, which have been denied to them in the real world because of adult concerns about public safety. Teens, she says, want access to publics to see and be seen, to socialize, and to feel as if they have the freedoms to explore a world beyond the heavily constrained one shaped by parents and school. So her logic makes a lot of sense to me. I think the social media fills a vacuum because our society has been so successful in delaying the maturity of the young by removing them from and isolating them from the social fabric of useful participation and responsibility. Of course, this escape from isolation and anonymity applies not just to teens, but to all age groups for whom the internet and social media provide untold opportunities for engagement, for entrepreneurship, entertainment, learning, and problem solving. So the internet is either a miracle of connectivity, or for those like Amanda Todd, trapped in its snake pit of persecution. It is what John Oliver called a dark carnival of humanity's most wretched impulses. Now to the apocalypse. The physicist Stephen Hawking said last year He warned that that artificial intelligence would spell the end of the human race. I find this a rather strange but perhaps predictable prophecy from someone whose functional existence is so dependent on artificial intelligence. Anyway, he warned that conscious machines would develop at an ever-increasing rate once they began to redesign themselves. Humans, he said, who are limited by slow biological evolution couldn't compete and would be superseded. Similar forebodings have been voiced by Elon Musk and by Bill Gates and others. Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak used to be gloomy about a distant future dominated by artificial intelligence. He now concludes that it would be good for humanity in the long run. He believes that super smart robots would keep us as pets. He says they're going to be smarter than us, and if they're smarter than us, they'll realize they need us. They'll be so smart by then that they'll know they have to keep nature, and humans are part of nature. So I got over my fear that we'd be replaced by computers. They're going to help us. Woz assures us that the timetable for humans to be reduced from the self-crowned kings of Earth to obsolete sentient life forms sustained by their own creations is measured in hundreds of years. And for our distant descendants, life won't really be bad. We want to be the family pet and be taken care of all the time, he said, adding, I got this idea a few years ago, and so I started feeding my dog filet steak and chicken every night because do unto others. When Pauline and I were working in Moscow during Perestroika in the late 1980s and early 90s, I was visited by a successful Soviet writer. Like me, he had published in the USSR a best-selling book on creativity and human potential, and he wanted to collaborate on a joint book about the future man. I asked him how he envisaged this new man. He then described for me a list of mechanical limbs and organs which science and technology would make available to the humans of the future. These mechanical parts, he noted, would be easier to service and replace, thus making the future man more adaptable and longer living. I did not need much time to consider his offer of cooperating on Homo mechanicus. After all, the Soviets had tried since the revolution to construct the new man. The result was Homo sovieticus, a passive, obedient, fearful, colorless person without hopes, dreams, or imagination, cogs in the massive totalitarian machinery of Soviet communism. Obviously a failed experiment. I politely declined his invitation. Afterwards, I reflected on our lost sense of the human essence and the human mission. It will be helpful to distinguish between technology and technopoly. The latter is a cult, an ideology, and totalitarian belief system. If you are fortunate to live in a part of the world not being devastated by civil war or governed by kleptocrats, then your brand of technological totalitarianism is more likely to resemble not the dystopian and brutal world of George Orwell's 1984, fashioned after the Soviet Gulag, but rather the self-destructive, pleasure-seeking playground of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, a dystopian novel published in 1932, set in London, that portrays a society operating on the principles of mass production and Pavlovian conditioning, a world of genetically modified babies, boundless consumption, casual sex, and drugs. He got it right back in 32, eh? In October 1949, following the publication of 1984, Huxley wrote to George Orwell, telling him how fine and how profoundly important the book is. In his letter to Orwell, he predicted, within the next generation, I believe that the world's leaders will discover that infant conditioning and narco-hypnosis are more efficient as instruments of government than clubs and prisons, and that the lust for power can be just as completely satisfied by suggesting people into loving their servitude as by flogging them and kicking them into obedience. Neil Postman is an American sociologist, and he described the two social scenarios in his book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, Public Discourse in the Age of Show Business. It was published in 1985. He writes, We were hanging our eyes on 1984, keeping our eyes on 1984. When the year came and the prophecy didn't, thoughtful Americans sang softly in praise of themselves. The roots of liberal democracy had held. Wherever else the terror had happened, we at least had not been visited by Orwellian nightmares. But he had forgotten that alongside Orwell's dark vision, there was another, slightly older, slightly less well-known, equally chilling, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Contrary to common belief, even among the educated, Huxley and Orwell did not prophesy the same thing. Orwell warns that we will be overcome by an externally imposed opposition. But in Huxley's vision, no big brother is required to deprive people of their autonomy, maturity, and history. As he saw it, people will come to love their oppression, to adore the technologies that undo their capacities to think. What Orwell feared were those who would ban books. What Huxley feared was that there would be no reason to ban a book, for there would be no one who wanted to read one. See my relative above. Orwell feared that those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those who would give us so much that we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Orwell feared that we would become a captive culture. Huxley feared that we would become a trivial culture. As Huxley remarked in Brave New World, revisited, the civil libertarians and nationalists who are ever on the alert to oppose tyranny fail to take into account man's almost infinite appetite for distractions. In Orwell's 1984, people are controlled by inflicting pain. In Brave New World, they are controlled by inflicting pleasure. In short, Orwell feared that what we fear will ruin us. Huxley feared that what we desire will ruin us. And who, asked Postman, would take arms against a sea of amusements? Anyway, Neil Postman's book is about the possibility that Huxley, not Orwell, was right. One of the symptoms of living in a world flooded by electronic devices and toys is the well-known condition of attention deficit disorder. Microsoft recently announced this year that our attention span has been reduced in the last few years from 12 to 8 seconds. That, by the way, is 1 second below the notoriously inattentive goldfish. Aside from laptops, smartphones, and iPods in our classrooms, what kinds of bells and whistles does a teacher need in today's hyperkinetic popular culture to hold the attention of students? And what does this mean for the conventional method of classroom lectures from kindergarten to grad school? If you are a teacher with 20 or 30 students, there is a good chance that Facebook and Google know more about your students than you do. Small classes matter. They improve social chemistry, enhance participation, and replace lecturing with mentoring. A more fundamental problem with living a life of infinite distraction is that we lose sight of the social, economic, and ecological tsunamis that are overwhelming the world. While the masses are glued to the flickering images on Plato's cave wall, the wealthy 1% are walking away with the family silver, dining poolside, and boasting that they don't mind the slings and arrows of New York Times editorials so long as they can keep their outrageous fortune. I suspect, we're almost ready for a break here, I suspect that the ultimate subconscious goal, the latent agenda of the Internet of Things and technopoly in general, is to render the human being useless, senseless, and pointless, a version of the neutron bomb that is designed to kill off the human race but leave the infrastructure intact. I accept the inevitability that computers and robots will take over much of the routine drudgery of human work, and I believe that computers will stimulate the educational process. Given a cost-benefit choice, employers would prefer machines to people, As Stalin once ominously remarked, where there are people, there are problems. Where there are no people, there are no problems. I am more concerned that human beings will themselves become robotic and abandon their human birthright, which is the gift of consciousness and includes responsibility to our fellow human beings and other sentient life on this planet. The internet and the information revolution have made it possible for people to take greater personal responsibility for their health and nutrition, their education, and the general management of their lives. However, the ethos of technopoly can lead to distortions in human practice in two critical spheres, medicine and education. Increasingly, our society relies on technology and technical testing to assess health profiles, while scarce resources and poorly designed services limit the quality time that overworked health professionals can spend with their patients, putting a lie to the pervasive big pharma commercials advising us to consult our doctors when their drugs react negatively. In our quest for a post-humanism high-tech utopia, are we in danger of losing the human equation? Ask yourselves, why do placebos work? They work because patients place their trust in their doctor's power of suggestion. It is precisely this trust that engages autosuggestion that triggers the self-healing process in the patient. It's all about relationships and the reciprocity of human energy. So let me tell you a story about a friend of mine. His name was Bill Forder, and he was a few years ahead of me in school. And he used to come to our home and tutor me in French. Didn't do any good, by the way. And Bill went on to do a science and medical degrees at the University of Western Ontario. And Bill came from a very modest socioeconomic background, and he always worked to put himself through school and university. One day, while he was in, I guess he was in medical school at the time, he was driving his motorcycle to a construction site, and he crashed and had a very bad accident. Among his many injuries was a ruptured pancreas, which could have proven fatal if not for the surgical skills of his doctor, and a routine whereby his doctor came in to see him every day and stood at the end of his bed and put his hands on his toes and talked to him about his medical studies, about the weather, about what was going on in the world. Many years later, Bill told me that routine, that connection that the doctor made with him was really important in his full recovery. Bill went on to become a urologist and a surgeon and head of urology at a Toronto hospital. But I think it shows how, how the doctor's psychological and physical engagement with the patient gave Bill a will to live and stimulated his own self-healing energies. Anyway, those who promote the use of robots in hospitals and nursing homes are missing the vital equation that governs the exchange of energies. And does not the same potential spark of creative energy exist in a mutual way between teacher and student that leads the student on a path to self-learning? You would think that radiologists would routinely understand the value of their work, but the study has found that diagnostic accuracy increased when a photograph of the patient was attached to the scan. There is nuance and infinite variability in human nature that machines can approximate but never fully grasp. And the same logic, by the way, applies to machine learning and machine editing and translation. So I'm going to break there and take a breath, and maybe you want to take a breath too.
Is this a good time for questions if people
Sure,
have
yeah,
questions,
by all
comments,
means.
I knew this was going to be one of those sessions that just fills my brain, but it's taking me a while to take things in, but if anyone has any questions.
This is one of the most fantastic talks I've attended here, so thank you so much for coming here.
Thank Lisa, it was her idea.
Lisa. One of the things that struck me about what you were talking about so very eloquently is that coming from a third world country myself, third world, living in the first world of pleasure and desire, I feel as if the Orwellian world and the Huxleyan world both mutually constitute each other. So a lot of people that in my limited experience I've encountered definitely desire that pleasure of not knowing the other, but I think that not knowing the other, not wanting them in your space, not them turning up as refugees over here with persecutions and histories of brutality in which the West is actually actively involved, also comes from an Orwellian conception which is in conversation with the Huxleyan conception, that is fear talking to pleasure. So I was just wondering if you can elaborate your thoughts on how pleasure also is derived from the fear of the other in your analysis.
Well, the Oktoberfest is on in Germany right now, and they're really worried what the migration of Syrian Muslims is going to do to their pork and beer fiasco there. So it is an interesting interface that happens, and really. My wife and I are very involved and follow international politics and the Cold War, and much of the tension really is also between the Hollywood version of life is fun, get out there and enjoy it, drink your Coca-Cola for breakfast, and other cultures trying to preserve some integrity regarding values, whether it be Russia or whether it be many other countries. So there is a real tension there, and I would say that American imperialism extends not only to weaponry in many countries, but also to soft power. And that soft power includes not only the endowment for democracy and U.S. aid and the CIA and so on, but also this great Hollywood infiltration in countries around the world. And this is not the Hollywood of the 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s. This is a pretty violent and often sadomasochistic culture that is being promulgated around the world. So your question is very relevant. Anything else? Should we? I'm not used to talking so much,
We're thinking. We're getting better. Yeah.
It's my wife I let do the talking. Or my dogs, rather. Okay, now to technopoly and education. Common Core is an attempt by the U.S. Federal Department of Education and the National Governors Association to establish a nationwide standard for curriculum, content, and testing in English and math. And that's just for starters. It has met with serious backlash from students, teachers, administrators, state politicians, and others, many of whom are opting out. Even the retiring Secretary of Education, Arnie Duncan, whose department is responsible for this big push, said that testing is sucking the oxygen out of the room in a lot of schools. Parents and teachers have long argued that attaching ramifications to testing have warped education, forcing schools to focus on math and reading at the expense of social studies, science, art, and music. Besides, it is well known in the research community that standardized tests most reliably measure a student's household income, ethnicity, race, and parental education. In our economies, standardized tests are necessary and useful instrument to ensure the quality of manufactured products. But people are not products. An honest appraisal of standardized testing in schools reveals that far from invigorating the learning process, they constrict it. Teachers teach to the test, and students disparage knowledge that is unlikely to be tested. In typical American fashion, Common Core was hastily implemented at the behest of a few highly paid consultants with negligible preparation for teachers and often terrible results for children. There is the charge that Microsoft founder Bill Gates and his foundation were decisive in approving the system and in helping to fund it, and that his motivation, by the way, the foundation had a very close relationship with the Obama administration, and that his motivation was to create national standards to produce new generations of software specialists and coders for the digital economy. Standardized curriculum and standardized textbooks permit standardized tests that produce standardized abilities in standardized human beings for a standardized industry. Technopoly at work. A boon to political correctness and corporate shareholder returns. We rightly worry about the depletion of biodiversity in nature. Should we not also worry about the loss of intellectual and emotional diversity in human nature? No two grains of sand are identical. How different then are the infinitely complex natures of human beings? The great blues guitarist B.B. King was asked what made him so great. He answered simply, "There are many guitar players better than me, only they're not me." We need to ask ourselves, to what extent does the dubious business of tests and credentials interfere with the authentic role of education in developing and releasing human potential? Which is why I admire this center, by the way. There are no tests afterwards, by the way. Lockstep factory schooling and its offspring, passive learning, are ill-suited to the complexity and volatility of modern life. In contrast, the age of the internet brings with it unlimited avenues for free individualized learning or self-teaching through YouTube, blogs, the World Press, and myriad podcasts, thus replicating and magnifying the old-fashioned 19th century culture of self-improvement. If, as Socrates declared, education is not about filling a vessel, but of igniting a flame, then there are countless sparks flying off the World Wide Web to ignite learning across generations. We are talking here about a stupendous social, artistic, and intellectual democracy for discourse and education, truly cosmic in scope. It is interesting that the most innovative nations on the planet, the United States, Israel, and Sweden, demonstrate poor or mediocre scores on international standardized tests. Yet these countries excel in science, technology, research, and innovation. The volatile future belongs to imagination, to critical thinking, social skills, daring, and creativity. For memory work and regurgitation, we have artificial intelligence, thanks to Google search. Real learning begins with curiosity, inspiration, searching, and hands-on experience. In the computer age, consciousness replaces memory. So I don't want to go on about Common Core, but the Pearson Corporation, which used to publish the Economist magazine, they control 40% of the multi-billion-dollar test industry in America, and they advertise for test markers on the English portion on Craigslist, and they pay $12 an hour, and with no validation of the skills of those testers. And teachers' careers and lives are based on those results. This is the kind of fraud that is going on in a commercialized world of the industrial educational complex. Okay. In a Charlie Rose interview this past summer, Bill and Melinda Gates discussed the work of their foundation and its principal concerns of health healthcare and education. Commenting on their global healthcare policy, Melinda Gates declared that their philosophy was, quote, all lives have equal value. Now, this philosophy is admirable for its global humanitarian perspective, as well as for its efficiency as a medical practice. The standardized model works reasonably well in certain healthcare sectors. While there is some variability in sensitivities to vaccines and drugs, generally one size fits all in applications such as tropical diseases and hygiene and maternal child health care. In contrast, the standardized model for the education of children is a disaster. Though their anatomies and physiologies are roughly similar, the disparities are vast in terms of consciousness and interests and talent and ability and motivation and energy and nutritional health and motivational intelligence and social skills, character, personality, and family socialization. So to leap from all lives have equal value to all lives should be subject to the same educational methodology and psychology is both illogical and empirically invalid. The quantification of education turns Einstein's famous phrase on its head, to wit, everything that counts can be counted, and what cannot be counted does not count. Moreover, in the age of the internet, the smartphone, and the lionization of youth by the corporate culture, technopoly in education, in the guise of factory schooling and standardized tests, is a losing game. This is why IT-empowered youth are on a collision course with bureaucratic, rigid schooling. So returning to Stephen Hawking's alarming prophecy, let's examine some of the practical downsides of artificial intelligence and technopoly that may be camouflaged by the hype of apocalyptic scenarios. How many suffer from information overload and the consequent confusion and distortion of values, not least of which is the disconnection between information and action. The French philosopher Montaigne wrote that no wind favors a ship without a destined port. Information overload and decision fatigue favors generated by IT have created countless confusing crosswinds and too many illusory ports. Case in point, online dating, or love in the time of algorithms. If sitting is the new smoking, has the computer age of electronic screens ushered in a rash of premature deaths from preventable sedentary lifestyle diseases? The quality and amount of teen sleep is inversely related to the quantity of screen devices and the indiscriminate hours devoted to the electronic cave wall. When we become mesmerized by our fancy smartphones, it is easy to forget that the absurd antics of the bolt tightener in Charlie Chaplin's film Modern Times are grim reality today for millions of Asian high-tech laborers whose inhumane work conditions were brought to light by Ed Bertinsky's award-winning documentary film Manufactured Landscapes, for which my Mandarin-speaking nephew Noah was the China fixer, cameraman, and line producer. Even in America, a former Apple manager advised that if you ever want a good night's sleep, don't work at Apple. You will be on call 24/7. The renowned Apple design head, Johnny Ive, described himself in a New Yorker profile this year as both deeply, deeply tired and always anxious. There is risk in the democratization of internet technology, the tech empowerment of immature citizens who have not mastered the rudiments of civilized language and behavior. Nowadays, Eric Schmidt and others suggest that netizens should consider changing their names at age 18 to thwart searches that could dig up their indiscreet, youthful pasts. And given the proliferation of selfies, plastic surgery might also be a bad idea. An option anyway. So if you're at all concerned about privacy, experts advise not to put anything in an email or on social media that you would not want to see on the front page of a national newspaper. There is danger in the exploitation of the internet and social media. By the way, there are thousands of viruses that come on board every day in the world, and the antivirus companies, malware companies, detect about 5% of them at the time. So there is danger in the exploitation of the internet and social media by those who incite hatred and by recruiters of extremist movements. You're all familiar with that. There is the danger of anonymity afforded to criminals, fraudsters, pranksters, and predators on the internet. There is the very real and ever-present threat of cyber warfare, which can put at risk a nation's infrastructure. A digital economy and the internet of everything means that all of cyberspace is exposed. The worst is yet to come. There are risks of fraud, manipulation, miscalculation, and market collapse from dark markets and from high-speed computer-driven trading. The real threat from AI is that all these internet-connected systems are hackable and therefore vulnerable to criminals, malcontents, as well as political enemies and economic enemies. For cyber weapons in an age of asymmetrical warfare, the barrier to entry is very low. They are cheap and hard to deter. The very success of the internet, its speed, efficiency, low cost, scope, and openness, is also the source of its largely unforeseen vulnerability, its insecurity. The early internet architects thought they were designing a classroom among trusted colleagues in academia or the military, but it turned out to be a bank whose deposits were held in the currency of astronomical information. Forget Fort Knox. The new gold is digitized data, which is the reserve currency of the world's biggest country. With 3 billion plus potentially anonymous users, the internet is the largest nation on earth, a global communications network nation without governance, security checkpoints, passports, or other identity verifiers, police, army, tariffs, or regulators. What we are dealing with here is the democratization of power. And power without the rule of law and a foundation of ethics degenerates into anarchy. Maxwell Smart, take off your shoe and call the office. Chaos has breached the city gates. Of course, chaos may also be the bridge to a new social order or disorder. In summary, I don't believe that artificial intelligence threatens human existence. I believe that humans themselves are the main threat. Humans whose thoughtlessness, absence of foresight, greed, and aggressiveness lead to irresponsible and harmful behavior. In his Devil's Dictionary, Ambrose Bierce defines responsibility as a detachable burden easily shifted to the shoulders of God, fate, fortune, luck, or one's neighbor. In the days of astrology, it was customary to unload it upon a star. So we might add that in the days of the computer, it is customary to unload responsibility upon artificial intelligence. Nevertheless, AI is a powerful disruptor, especially of job markets, together with globalization. Of course, automation has been occurring for 2 centuries, only now the pace is more robust. With computer power doubling every couple of years, the rates of job displacement are more rapid than ever. In contrast with the first industrial revolution, the evaluation of today's tech companies often vary inversely to their number of employees. Instagram was founded in 2010. In 2012, it had 13 employees when it was sold to Facebook for $1 billion. So let's shift our, I'm almost done here, let's shift our focus and take a look at the humanities. This is not simply a term or list of academic subjects like literature, languages, and history, but rather a reference to the nature and essentials of our humanity. Here's a timely quote. "We have developed speed that we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent and all will be lost." That's the great Charlie Chaplin in The Great Dictator, 1940. Our culture has drawn artificial lines between the arts and sciences and humanities. lines that did not exist for remarkable innovators like Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg. The founder of Facebook was a student of ancient Greek history and of psychology. When introducing the iPad 2, Jobs, a student of Zen Buddhism and meditation, who dropped out of college but continued to audit calligraphy classes, announced that it's in Apple's DNA that technology alone is not enough. It's technology married with liberal arts, married with the humanities, that yields us the result that makes our hearts sing. The complexity of modern life cries out for cooperation, for interdisciplinary perspectives, for creative solutions involving the integration of multiple mindsets. The market demand for many specialized academic disciplines is disappearing as fast as ice flows in the Arctic. When our educational systems will understand that the future creative energies belong to the synergy of human relationships and teamwork, they will downplay the competitive, corrosive, and isolating regime of artificial bell curves and abstract learning. To conclude, all of life seeks equilibrium, or what Buddha called the golden mean. When irrational exuberance indicates an inflationary bubble, it is time to examine balancing forces. So I discovered this canary in the digital coal mine from a New York Times article in 2011, like the fall of 2011, reporting on the chief technology officer of eBay, who sends his children to a 9-classroom Waldorf school in California. Now, Waldorf school is based on the philosophy of Rudolf Steiner, a Swiss educator, have become fashionable in California among techie employees of Silicon Valley giants like Google, Apple, Yahoo, and Hewlett-Packard, who are defying the ideology of technopoly by sending their kids to schools that reflect the humanistic values from a pre-digital age. The Waldorf philosophy is as much concerned with character and mindfulness as with literacy and numeracy. Social and emotional intelligence, a spirit of camaraderie, critical thinking, hands-on experiential learning, and integrative approaches to knowledge are keynotes. Computers and other electronic devices are discouraged in the elementary grades. The arts, drama, crafts, music, dance, drawing, and painting are emphasized to develop imagination, coordination, sensibilities, and creative self-expression. The schools attract especially talented teachers who feel they're on a mission and bring a strong sense of this mission. Today, neuroscientists would call it whole brain teaching and learning. Well, I wouldn't call this a shift in educational priorities among the digerati. I wouldn't call it a sea change, but it is indicative of the excesses of technopoly seeking redress through balance and a renewed humanism. Let me close with a brief quote from the Belgian writer Maurice Maeterlinck, who wrote, "At every crossroads on the path that leads to the future, tradition has placed 10,000 men to guard the past." Thank you. I'm 8 minutes over.